We're going to start with just some basics of how to add and subtract signed numbers or signed integers. So these are definitely things that we can use our calculator for, but it's going to make our life easier in the long run if we have a couple of tricks to use to do this quickly in our head. So your goal today is to add and subtract positive and negative integers. And an integer is just a number. So like -2 would be an integer. All right, so the best way that I can describe how to do this is I always think of it as a competition. So it's a competition between the positive numbers and the negative numbers. So here are two really important rules when you are adding integers. So if I have two numbers that have the exact same sign, so both positive or both negative, I'm going to always add those two numbers together and take the sign they both have. So take the sign they both have. Okay, so for example, if it's -2 plus -3, all I'm going to do is add 2 plus 3, which is 5. And since both of those are negative, my answer is going to be -5. Okay, so the negative team won because there's only negative points. Okay, now if I have two numbers that have different signs, so one's positive and one's negative, it's kind of weird because it's an addition problem, but I'm actually going to subtract those two numbers. And then this is where the competition comes in. I'm going to take the sign of the bigger number. Okay, so let me show you an example. So if I have -5 plus 3, the positives and negatives are having a competition, okay? This number 5 is bigger, so that means my answer has to be negative because the negative team won. And my rule says I'm actually going to subtract those two numbers. What's 5 minus 3? My answer is -2. Okay, so the negative team had 5 points, the positive team had 3 points, the negative team wins by 2 points. Okay, if you play Bago or anything like that, it's kind of like a competition. So let's take a look at these. This is the exact example I gave you earlier. Okay, so the numbers are both negative, so that means the negative team wins. I'm going to add them up, that's my rule, so my answer is -5. No calculator needed. I've got different signs in number 2, but -7 or 7 is a bigger number, which tells me that the negative team wins. And how many points did they win by? I'm going to subtract them. They won by 5 points. In example 3, my bigger number is positive, so that means my answer is going to be positive. And how many points did the positive team win by? They won by 2 points. 5 minus 3 is 2. Now this time I've got 3 numbers, so I'm just going to focus on the first 2. -3 plus -1, both of those are negative, so my answer has to be negative, and I'm going to add them up. So all together I have 4 points. I'm going to bring down that +7, and now I'm going to have a whole new problem. Now, the 7 is bigger and it's positive, so my answer has to be positive, and I'm going to subtract them. So my answer is +3. Okay? Now, a couple different rules when I have subtraction. Okay? Subtraction you need to think of as the same thing as adding the opposite. I just learned 2 rules up above. I want to keep using those rules, so I have to change all of my subtraction into addition, and I'll show you how to do that legally, okay? So if subtracting integers becomes a challenge, you're going to change it to an addition problem, and then we can use those same rules from up above, which team won. So we're going to refer to that as presto changeo. It's kind of like a magic trick. It's going to be your lifesaver. Oops. Okay, this is our lifesaver when we have negative numbers, okay? So for the first example, ignore this, sorry about that. Okay, in this first example, 17 minus 8 shouldn't be too tricky. I don't always have to use my lifesaver if it's not a tricky type of problem. 17 minus 8 is pretty straightforward. My answer there is going to be 9. No tricks, no magic, nothing. It's just pretty straight up. Number 2 is where I get a little tricky. Now, my bigger number is towards the back, so I need a little bit of help. I need my lifesaver here to help me solve this problem easier. So I'm going to use presto changeo, where I'm going to change this subtraction sign into addition. But in order to do that, I need to change the second number into the opposite. So instead of a +17, it's now going to become a negative 17. The reason for that is now I can use my rules that I learned up here, okay, when I have different signs. Now I can use that same rule because now this is an addition problem. So I'm going to look, this is my bigger number, so my answer is going to be negative, and I'm going to subtract those two numbers because I have different signs. So my answer now is going to be negative 9. Okay? Oh. Sorry. Okay, this one is definitely going to be needed, this presto changeo. So I have a subtraction problem. I'm going to change that to addition, and this is a positive 12, so I need to add the opposite, presto changeo. So now I have the same sign, negative 4 plus negative 12. My answer has to be negative, and since they're the same sign, I'm just going to add them up. So this is going to be a positive 16, or sorry, negative 16. And then something like this is where presto changeo is absolutely necessary. Okay, so now I have a subtraction sign. I'm going to do presto, change. The opposite of a negative 5 is positive 5. So you'll see by doing presto changeo, adding the opposite, this is a much easier problem than it first looked. It's really just 3 plus 5. So I have 8. Another presto changeo. So really this is negative 7 plus 10. My bigger number is positive. I'm going to subtract those two numbers, and it's going to be positive 3. And then finally, presto changeo, add the opposite. This is really negative 9 plus 2. My bigger number is negative, so my answer is going to be negative 7.